Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're going to talk with Robert today, and I'm thinking to make it as interactive as possible.
Actually, what I'd love to do to start would be to just, if we could go around the screen, and what I'd like to ask is, where are you physically? And if you're willing, I know this is kind of bold, but if you're willing to just have a couple of words, not a sentence, but just a couple of words about how you are feeling in this moment. All right. So I'm going to just start with just a couple of thoughts in response to the narrative, but then want to get into as much conversation as we can. One of the things that I noticed was, and I'll quote out of the narrative to provide some start off for this, is that in the narrative it says, "Harmony sounds so nice as a solution, and yet there are broken systems, greedy, power-hungry people in the world, and as some of us argued almost all the time, transformation is difficult, chaotic, and demands sacrifice," which, and that jumped out at me because it suggested that whoever was feeling that was thinking about harmony in a way that's different from what I'm intending. So I really wanted to be able to clarify that. In effect, that describes harmony as something that you get to consume. And what I'm talking about is harmony as something that you produce. So it's more a matter of embodying the three harmonies, especially the harmony within, gives one the capacity to go into broken systems, places where there are greedy people, et cetera, et cetera. It's, you can almost think of it as a nonviolent martial art, if you will. It's developing that inner capacity that means that you are able to, in whatever situation you go into, you're able to, well, and let me not talk about it just in terms of harmony, be a little more neuroscience about it. One of the things that we talk about is your optimal zone as the place where you are neither in fight flight nor are you in freeze or fawn, with the work of Stephen Porges, to really get into this and understanding that there are not just two components to the autonomic nervous system, but three components: the upper parasympathetic nervous system, which is really all about the question of how safe you feel. And when you are feeling more safe internally, not because of what's around you, but internally more safe, then you're able to be in a psychological space that allows more creativity, more compassion, all of the qualities that actually make you more useful. And so the goal here is to be able to, not just through will-based training, but certainly learning new skills, but also being able to go through your own healing process so that you have a greater capacity for being able to be in your optimal zone in more and more challenging situations. Because when you're able to be in your optimal zone, you're able to help others get closer to their optimal zone. And so all of you are able to be a more effective, creative team in dealing with whatever it is that's coming up. One of the things that our threat detection system, the amygdala, the limbic system, all of that developed over hundreds of millions of years. And it was all oriented towards immediate physical survival, reacting to immediate physical threats. And it's really good for that, for dealing with stuff that's evolving very quickly in split-second timing. And we need that. But we humans are so good at our imaginations that we've repurposed it so that we're constantly imagining threats, imagining them as if they were an immediate physical threat, going into stress because of that, reducing our capacity. It's almost like an autoimmune response at the emotional level. And so embodying the harmony within is a matter of training yourself to not be in that autoimmune loop so that you can actually be more useful for the very real challenges that we confront. So I don't know. So that's one of my responses. There's another piece in there that was a question about the tension between well, it was around urgency and the question of the tension between urgency trying to move based on fear or urgency moved based on curiosity and creativity and a sense of opportunity. And I'd like to share with you the idea of long arc urgency. So what is long arc urgency? Long arc urgency is when the urgency extends over at least months. And for a lot of what we're dealing with now, it extends over years. And if you try to deal with long arc urgency with adrenaline, adrenaline is built to deal with things that last for maybe a few minutes. But if you try to deal with long arc urgency on an adrenaline basis, you're going to burn yourself out. You drive others into denial. We see it all the time in terms of what's going on around us, where we have these really significant problems and people are just stuck. So what I would say is that when you're dealing with long arc urgency, what provides sustainable motivation, and I would say love and creativity, are core to that. A sense of the opportunities, future pull. I like to say current events are dealing lots of sticks or providing lots of sticks. Our job, in order to move the donkey of world civilization, in order to move that donkey forward, our job is to provide better carrots. Our job is to do more that really can generate future pull and generate a motivation that is sustainable. And certainly a key part of that is motivation through community and motivation through, as I say, love and creativity are the things that are really generative and sustainable. It doesn't mean that you don't have a clear-eyed vision, a clear-eyed understanding of the challenges that are involved. It's just a question of how do you then live with those challenges. So I think I'm going to pause there, and that's probably enough of an initial riff. Although at this moment, because there was a question around practices, and I'm not going to give you all the practices. I can't do that. It takes too long. And I will say that this is, I'm not to make too much of a plug, but the course that Manuel went through, Bright Future Now, involves getting into a lot of the more experiential and practice part of this. What you've seen in videos and you're hearing from me now is at a conceptual level. Bright Future Now is much more oriented towards the relational and the experiential. But I'll share with you one simple practice and then describe the neuroscience behind that. But I like to start with the experience. So if you're up for this, and although let me start by saying that we like to focus on what I would call the simple but the archetypal. So this practice that I'm going to show you has really good grounding in neuroscience and is going to remind you of practices from a lot of spiritual traditions, because a lot of spiritual traditions were really quite savvy in terms of the neuroscience they understood. So pick your metaphysic. I don't care. It's the experience that counts. So let me, this is something we call the neurological reset. And so let me just demonstrate it for you. You don't have to do it while I'm doing it first time. And then we'll all do it together if you're comfortable. And you can turn off your video or whatever, because it looks a little funny. I just want to warn you, it looks a little funny, but when you're dealing with the body, you got to deal with it in the body's terms, not in terms of what people might expect. So the first part of this, the part that looks funny, is that you scrunch up your cheeks and you kind of wiggle your nose. And you may wonder, what the heck is that about? What you're doing is you're stimulating nerves in the upper parasympathetic part of your nervous system, and releasing tensions in that part of the body. So it's, you do this kind of thing. And then as you've done that, what I find is it kind of tickles my nose, and that's the signal where I'm ready to breathe in through my nose comfortably, and then breathe out through my mouth, but a little more slowly than I breathe in through my nose. So we do that round, the face wiggling, breathing in, breathing out. We do that 3 times. Are you ready? Okay, so just start by scrunching up your cheeks, wiggling your nose. It's how it feels, not how it looks. And then when you're ready, breathe in through your nose comfortably, and then just let the air out slowly through your mouth. One more time. Scrunch up your cheeks. Breathe in through your nose. And slowly out through your mouth. You got the pattern. Do it one more time. So what's going on with that? What's going on is that the upper part of your the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part that mammals have but other vertebrates don't, is very much oriented towards connection and safety. And when you're stimulating that upper ventral vagus part of the parasympathetic nervous system, then you're helping your body neurologically and physiologically connect with a more comfortable state, a more, many people will find it relaxing. Although if you're really kind of depressed, it can actually feel sort of stimulating and lift you up. It doesn't change your belief systems or anything else like that. And if you are really in a tizzy about something, it will only help you temporarily. But what it does is that it gives you a tool for being able to assist your body in coming back to a more optimal zone place after you've been triggered, after there's been something that has meant that you've been stimulated into a more sympathetic nervous system response. And part of the idea of having something that's this simple is that you can carry it with you anywhere. You can actually do it in a much less exaggerated way in the midst of a meeting, and nobody else will even know that you're doing it. But having tools like this mean that you can actually put them into practice. Okay, let me just stop there. Turn things back to Michael.
Yeah, I'm thinking that we can go to questions. And if anyone doesn't have a question, I can start off. What I'm thinking is we're talking about this planetary era, and what is the path forward you see right now towards that? Apart from us sitting in small Zoom rooms talking about it. What is the next step you see in the coming 1 to 2 years? Not the long frame, but what we do next.
Yeah. Well, I'm a fan of looking at, first of all, looking at culture as a complex adaptive system, which means that there are lots and lots of different parts and lots of decision points, lots and lots of interdependent players who all can contribute into it, and then understanding change in that as a kind of diffusion of innovations process. And that often means that the really interesting stuff is happening before it reaches the New York Times. And so you may look at, these, small groups in Zoom rooms and say, what the heck difference is that going to make? My experience is, and my sense from what I've understood, is that this is actually where the interesting action begins, but it is only a beginning. And if it is just conversation, if it doesn't lead to changes in behavior, then we're not getting far enough. We're just entertaining ourselves. Having said that, let me also say that if you want an example of really advanced process of change for climate change, for instance, look at the work that's been done by Rocky Mountain Institute, and in terms of its and the work that's ongoing with it, and the way that they have managed to pull together over years all kinds of players, keep pushing the edge of the sense of possibility, being able to expand people's awareness of things. I think that's a great place to move. I feel as though the really big issue, and I'm not saying it's necessarily just the next 2 years, but the really big issue that we continue to work on is that we have the history of thinking that things need to be organized in dominance hierarchies. But increasingly, things are organized in networks, in webs. So what's happening on the ground, and as we become much more peer-to-peer communication connected, what's happening on the ground is that more and more of what's happening is network-based. But we don't yet have a lot of experience. We don't have a really great toolkit for how to do this. So the more that can be done, for instance, in business organizations, and this is a place where I appreciate sociocracy as a model, for instance, of a pattern in business organizations where you have an operational hierarchy, but it isn't structured as a dominance hierarchy, and you have a much greater awareness of the importance of feedbacks flowing in all directions. And I don't hold that up as sociocracy being the answer, but more just an example. And I think that the more in which we can figure out how in face-to-face groups, in business organizations, et cetera, to organize in ways that are based on the harmony within, the harmony with others, and the harmony with nature, and based on a recognition that people increasingly will not be trapped into dominant structures unless you function as an attractor in a leadership role. If you think you can function as a dominator in a leadership role, you're going to discover that people will walk away from you because increasingly they can. And so it's by learning the skills of how to function as an attractor, and important parts of that are the degree to which you're able to really see other people in their wholeness, invite them in. A really important part. I mean, part of that at the very beginning, where I wanted to be able to hear from everybody, was because I think it's really important for everybody's voice to be in the room. Klaus, I see, yes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the issue of hierarchy is a struggle because we're coming from an evolutionary path where in order to orchestrate the function of a society was done through dominance. Mm-hmm. So now we have if for no other reason than issues of complexity, that hierarchy, the dominance has to be diffused, power has to be diffused. Mm-hmm. But we still need hierarchy. And the frustrating moment that we're finding ourselves in is that there is a lack of agreement on what is the actionable information, what is best available science, what do we need to know to respond within our field of expertise in ways that is responsible to securing our future. Mm-hmm. And so that brings me to Donald Meadows' leverage points of a system, mm-hmm. where we are dealing at the paradigm level on the one hand to reshape our narrative, to reshape our understanding of reality and the world around us, but then to move this into action, we need to go down the administrative ladder that she created, and she has her 12 points, mm-hmm. where in each stage you're dealing with a different context, with the need to translate the narrative into metaphors that are stage appropriate to these phases. So we haven't been very good at, in my mind, developing an understanding of how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Good. Keenan, you want to toss something in there too?
Yeah, thanks. And I'll try to be succinct, but I think that we make assumptions around the history of society and how structures have to work, including the idea of competition for evolution. It's mm-hmm. a construct, and there's a lot of disconfirming evidence that that's the only path. Mm-hmm. So in terms of what you were just saying, Klaus, I think that what's emerging for me even recently is the criticality of roles, but you don't have to have hierarchy per se. So you don't have to have dominance of one structure over another or one group of humans over another. And I think just to question that would be really useful. And looking at, I'm forgetting, furiation, what's the word? But if you look at groups in biology of organisms, they can self-organize very well without having domination patterns. So mm-hmm. that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, they want to throw in a few things here. One is that the challenge that our language really forces us in a categorical direction, and our Age of Enlightenment heritage gets us wanting to look for universal solutions, where so often the context really matters. And as we move forward, I think it's important to avoid what I would call categorical reversal. And hierarchy is a great example with that, where we have experienced dominance hierarchies and know the problems with that. And so we want to flip the category around to the polar opposite of having things totally flat. And that has its challenges as well. Look in nature, and there are lots of operational hierarchies as well as nets. And so our challenge is to be able to expand how do I say it? We want to break out of the monopoly of hierarchical organization. It isn't so much that we need to totally abandon all use of tree structures, but be able to learn how to overlay trees and nets, and how to find what's the right interplay between those trees and those nets. So in many, many things at this point, the challenge is to, it's breaking out of the monopolies. It isn't tossing one thing aside for the sake of another. I think there was a comment in the narrative about not tossing aside everything from the tribal and the empire eras. And I totally agree. It's a question of how do we bring forth the parts that really need to be there into something that is actually an expanded territory, a more inclusive territory. And hi, Ken.
Hi, Robert. That was actually, this is jazz hands, meaning I applaud or agree with it. So, but it does often look like I'm waving. So, along those lines, as a facilitator, something I've learned over the years is if I ask questions about how do we solve X, it puts people in a problem-solving mindset. And I think a problem-solving mindset is actually not what's required given the complexity of the wicked messes that we're looking at. So I find it much more effective to say, what would it look like if this was actually working? So if we have to make a transition from here to there, what does there look like when it's got everything it needs for us to thrive? And that opens an imaginal space that's just a lot more effective for generating solutions than how do we solve? Because I think that, you know, we were so successful in since the scientific revolution of inventing solutions out of nothing for problems. And when we look at the world as problems, it narrows our focus. When we look at it as a bunch of shared concerns that are very messy, it takes us into a different way of thinking about it. So I really like what you're saying. You know, another one of the examples is patriarchy. You know, a lot of men think if it's not patriarchy, then it would be women ruling, and it's not women ruling. It's very, very different. But we have that binary built-in, you know, assumption. So getting out of that's a really important trap to learn how to sidestep and have an Aikido move for.
Eva.
Yeah. On Wednesday, we talked a lot about human agency. And my question to you would be, do you think we're going to move from move into the planetary era through human agency, or is it going to be forced upon us through events beyond our control, like natural events? If I take the example of the pandemic, now all of a sudden we see this has changed our lifestyle completely, changed the way we are living, we are thinking, we are reacting to events. It has forced on us a lot of collaborative efforts at the local, community, and perhaps even country level. And there are things like climate change. I will take an example. Today itself, in the southern part of the island, there's been a flash flood. 400 millimeters of rain in just a few hours. A lot of flooding around. This kind of thing has never happened before. We used to have big cyclones visiting us every year, but now we don't have these big cyclones. We are having a lot of these flash floods coming. It's getting more and more frequent, which means we need to change the pattern of activity, the things that we are doing. How do we react to these things? Now, it seems that all we're doing here, we probably are on the right side of history trying to make things happen, but we talk how to mobilize people. So I believe all these changes happening is going to force people to mobilize and develop a cohesive force to bring change. How do you react to that? Yeah.
So complex adaptive systems and the importance of, at this point, building your toolkit, because in a detailed sense, you don't know what's going to come up over the horizon, like the pandemic came up. And sure, there were lots of people who expected pandemics, but it wasn't in the general consciousness. And so if we think about the society around us as if it were a machine that we could sit back and design and then implement, we would approach things in one way, but it's not the case. And especially with all of the increase in peer-to-peer communication and the increase in, two big trends. One is the small world, and the other is full Earth. Full Earth in an ecological sense, in fact, over full Earth in an ecological sense, and small world and all that interconnection. Those are going to keep working as driving forces, but they aren't the sole drivers. There were a lot of different reactions to the pandemic in various different countries, which shows that it's because it's a complex adaptive system. It's going to be this combination of what do the humans bring to it and what do events bring. So I think for us at this point, the more we can do to build our toolkits, and that's where what we do in Bright Future Now, and then this is moving on into the Bright Future Network, is really to focus on core toolkits. Some of this involves the more emotional side that we were talking about in terms of harmony within. But another important piece of that, as I was mentioning, was getting away from categorical thinking as a monopoly, breaking out of the monopoly of categorical thinking. And we do that not by just wagging our fingers and saying, nah, 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 categorical thinking is bad, you got to do something else, but actually having something else that you can do, which is what we call territory and map perception, which is our introduction into systems thinking. And so really experiencing what it's like to look at something not as an object, but look at it as a territory. And the distinction there is that our evolution has trained us to be able to quickly recognize things as objects, categorize them, we've got it in split second as to what name we're going to apply to that and all sorts of things. If you look at the same thing, but not as an object, but as a territory, you have a sense of what its boundary is, but you don't know. Looking at something as a territory is an invitation to learn more. And then what you do with that learning is you put that together into maps. But with maps, you recognize that every map is partial and selective and provisional. So you're humble about the maps, but you can still use them. You got to go with the best map you got. And different people will have different maps, but that doesn't mean that you have to choose only one map. There are often multiple maps that have multiple purposes. And so if you can have a conversation that isn't struggling over what's going to be the definition, but instead have a conversation that says, here's my map, what's your map? What can we learn about the differences between them? Ray, yeah.
One of the interesting things that's sort of emerging is having watched your videos and having you speak is awesome, because we can now sort of get a holistic view of what you're referring to. And I think are we undergoing a mental model change in our view of instead of fixing the old, which has been the hierarchical system of fixing the machine, to largely shifting that to designing the new? And there's an expression that we found a few years back that was we have a tradition of just technology makes us do new old things in new ways, while we should be looking at new things in new ways. And I think the sense I have from what you've been referring to is we're really designing the bright new future, or and learning to live in it. So we're actually inventing and creating something new rather than the fixed aspect. Is that a correct sort of?
In part.
Okay, yeah, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what I would say is that it's really fruitful at this point to be prototyping new elements. The whole thing is too emergent, and is going to change too much along the way for us to sit back and try to just design the whole thing. so it's living into it in that way, and there will be elements of the old that we want to carry forward. So there's bringing that discernment, but I think it really is a mind shift, and for me, it often has to begin with experience, because if you attempt to do a mind shift based on the concepts you already have in your mind, it doesn't work. This is, not to get too far off on this, but this is one of the reasons that the psychedelics were so impactful in the 60s, because you had a whole bunch of people who were really brought up in the culture at that time, and then they had experiences that were just outside of anything that the culture had brought them. I'm not saying that's the only route to that, but international travel is a great help that way as well. Yeah. So it is a willingness. It's, how do I say this? There is a certain amount of hospice work that needs to be done with the dying of the old patterns. But at least as much attention, I think, needs to go to midwifery. And there is a birth that's underway. And for us in this moment, it's not like we're creating the birth. There's already a lot of momentum to it. And my recommendation is to not try to just imagine totally what you would want and say, how do we do this? But get some sense of what's already the momentum that's there in the culture. And how do you work with that momentum to go in directions that you would like? Something else that I'll put in here that's can be a little touchy, but let me just mention it. And that part of the increased self-awareness that I think is going to be important for all of us is to understand our own trauma patterns and the way that those trauma patterns influence our motivations. What I have seen all too often in activist groups is one layer of what they're doing is responding very much to an existing issue and challenge, but another layer is working out their family of origin psychodynamics in a setting that feels like they can do it. I'm going to get it right this time. Not that they're conscious of it, but that that's what's being played out. So I think it's really important for us, as part of our due diligence almost, is to get a deeper understanding of what our own, what's the stuff we're bringing? What's the noise out of the stuff that we're bringing, so that we can really be attuned to the signal of what's possible next. I mean, who knows, by the 2100, the end of this current century, there may be all kinds of things going on that we would have a hard time imagining. If you think about 1921 and try to explain to someone in 1921 about your cell phone, how many different pieces would you have to go back and explain to them about that? So it's, in a complex adaptive system, it feels that the longest arc that you can carry, I think, is a sense of intention. The next longest arc that you can carry is a sense of process and toolkits. And then the shortest arc is design and planning. And they all have their role, but just be aware of what the time scale is that you're working with any one of them. Flora, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to explore this idea of intention, because I think I sort of operate in the sort of longer term, and get a little impatient and want to influence things so that the intention gets realized. So how do you actually balance that? That it's a creative dynamic, right? That you're always trying to map to an intention, not necessarily force things, but you want to invite people to be more intentional and maybe journey partners. So do you have some thoughts around that?
Yeah, probably. Because I do that. I zoom across all kinds of different levels, and I enjoy it. I don't know, it may give other people vertigo, but I enjoy it. You probably come across the sense that I work with in terms of, 20,000 years of history, pretty big frame, right? And I like being able to have those sorts of frames. That's part of the Nella Meadows paradigm shift, and even beyond that, her beyond paradigms, the last one in that list, I think it was Klaus who was talking about that. That's where you get to multiple maps. But as you come into a situation with where there's an opportunity for specific action, you really have to tune into what is the immediate context here. What is the specific here? And so I like to build up a toolkit that's sort of a pattern language toolkit. Rather than trying to find universal categorical rules for how we're going to deal with things, instead have a pattern language toolkit that allows going into a situation, having tools that connect to that intention, and then being able to see what is the reasonable next step that can be taken in this situation. And it is quite a dynamic, creative dance to be able to deal with it. Yeah, Klaus, please.
Yeah, I was making a comment in the chat that climate change is a great example how good intentions and really wanting to engage in the system that are governed with a lack of macro level information will end up sub-optimizing the system and create more problems. So this is now bringing back to the hierarchy of a narrative, of an understanding how the natural world works, how we need to impact it, some sort of. And I mean, I'm not wanting to say plan, because people self-organize if they have the right information. But we're living in an information world that has basically been weaponized. Which is another difficult issue. So how do you extract the information that you need to have in order to make your actions constructive and positive and supportive of the entire system itself, not just your bucket?
Right. And part of that extraction, I think, is it really helps to be working on the harmony within, to be able to improve your noise detector, as it were. Manuel.
Hi, Robert. I have a quick question. First of all, thank you. Some really great stuff here. Appreciate it. You mentioned earlier about the carrot, having some kind of carrot to give our people inspiration for the future. And I consider myself kind of in that camp of looking at the better future, the bright future. Reminded of Bucky Fuller, who in 20 pages in his book, Critical Path, painted an amazing better future in 20 pages. So my question has to do with how do we collectively paint that carrot, that better future, because so many people are in the doom and gloom, and So that's basically it, because I do think that there are some good scenarios for the future that we could be sharing with people to inspire them. Yet people don't seem to, at least I don't see enough concern in the future of that scenario. That's it.
Right. Yeah. Well, great. Pull them together, please. And
Thank you.
I think there is a really important issue of urgency, not urgency, of agency here. Urgency, yes, but agency, in that if the picture is too big, people don't feel a connection to it. And so if you don't feel agency, then people will just, our lives are so busy. Right now we're dealing with, how do I put it? It used to be that for most people, material resources were the real constraint. That's still true for many people in the world, but for an increasingly large number of people in the world, material resources are not the constraint. Time and attention are the constraint.
Right.
And so, Klaus, you talked about the weaponization. It's a weaponization of ways to suck attention, basically. And part of what we need to be able to do is to find the ways to reclaim our own sovereignty over our attention, and use that for things that are constructive. So my sense is that if you can provide people with a big picture of where things are headed, without necessarily filling in all the details, because then that doesn't allow the space for what's going to happen, but then a sense of what are reasonable next steps. What are steps that are accessible to people so that they have some agency for them. And this, and I really want to say, when I talk about harmony within, harmony with others, and harmony with nature, this is not wimpy. This is really developing capacity to bring harmony into situations that are disharmonious. And it isn't just emotional harmony. It's functional harmony. It's whatever it may be. It's being able to bring the higher capacities of both individuals and groups to bear on not necessarily just solving problems, although there are problems to be solved, but being able to really move into those situations.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
So I ought to be cognizant of the time. So,
Robert, could I just ask a quick question or make a comment? I don't know if it's a question or comment. I won't know until I finish, I think. If we all seem to have a common goal, we'd like to save the ass of civilization. I think you said donkey, but it's a similar animal.
Right.
One point that I thought was really very, very strong, and we often don't internalize it enough, and that is this idea that we can't roadmap or blueprint our way into the future to a better world. So if we want a world that is more robust and sustainable and healthy in general, what I'm getting from your work is that robust, sustainable, healthy world is going to come from robust, healthy, sustainable people. That's how we get there, is through our own personal change, our own worldview, our own intention. And that in a sense, if we try to see and design something out there and then just get to it, and this sort of comes with attention again, we get caught up in our not seeing what we're doing, not seeing what the contribution we're making is. In other words, not taking care of ourselves so that we can be that future. Because of course, it's people and their attitudes and their worldview that ultimately determine the world we have. Right. And the world we now have, and we know where that came from. So, yeah, I guess that's. I don't know if that's a question.
Well, I'm going to respond to it anyway.
Yeah, please.
And just say that yes, we need to work on the harmony within. We need to work on all of that stuff, and what we're trying to do in the whole Bright Future process is don't stop there. So that's why the harmony with others and the harmony with nature are equally important. Although for many people, the initial entry point, the place where there's the low-hanging fruit is in the harmony within. And it isn't like you just do one and then do the other and then, do it. I mean, you have to be working them all in an overlapping kind of way. But if we design new organizations on the basis of assuming that people are going to have the same trauma-based defense patterns that we see now, we will come up with one set of designs. If we have a group of people who have moved through a number of those trauma defense patterns and are able to, who are much more optimal zone resilient, et cetera, who know how to do, when somebody gets triggered in a group, what now happens so often is everybody else pulls back, don't know what to do. Well, if you have a group of people who know what to do, they've got the first aid training, it's a whole different story. And you're able to do things in those sorts of organizations that you just couldn't do otherwise. So that's part of what I mean by this. That gets specific about why we have to keep, the more that we can live into and embody is really important in this. It's not just get the ideas of, but develop the habits of, get it into your subconscious, get these patterns really shifted. Then all kinds of things become possible. And relative to something like climate change, we've known for a long time technically what we need to do. It's a human problem. So, all right. Michael, I see you've got your mute off, so I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, fantastic conversation. I didn't need to do any moderating at all here. So, but we're going to top it off now for our conversation, and it's been fantastic. Many of us will see each other again next week.
Our next Bright Future Now course is in July and August. 7-week course. It may turn into an 8-week course. We'll see. But it's and registration for that is happening now. And I will just mention that both Ken and Manuel have been through the program and are part of the Bright Future Network. The course is the gateway into the Bright Future Network.
Recommend it, folks. Please do it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate this conversation a lot. And everyone else, thank you so much.
So I'm about at a point where I could use a stretch. Could you join me in a stretch? Remember our bodies in all this. Our wonderful bodies. Okay, enough of that riff.